But what was really hard was really maintaining the spirit of the social platform. So
Hmm.
you sort of get caught up in a lot of things where you do and you're used to doing traditionally advertising, but what really took a lot of work was really making it feel more authentic and more about the people. And I think starting a brand on social that was started by fans ultimately led to a strategy that was about fans first.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Radical Content. I'm Eric Gray. I know it's been a couple weeks. We're trying to get these more regular. I'm talking to a guy that I've been connected to, had a chance to meet recently, Roberto Mastrocola. He's the former senior director of social media for Fortune 100 Coca-Cola. Like, this is a big, big brand we're talking today. And Roberto, rather, I don't know how you did it, how you got your name Cola in your last name, and you worked for Coca-Cola for as long as you did. It feels like it was kind of destiny. And I know you're not there anymore, but we're going to break open a lot of your time. You were there for almost 18 years, and so super pumped to have you on the show today. So welcome to Radical Content.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Eric. Appreciate it.
So I always like to ask this question to start because people that are in social and digital storytelling, kind of that like adjacent marketing area, I like to say, they kind of got into it in all sorts of different ways. And so without kind of going way back into your whole story, tell me a little bit about how did you kind of catch the bug for branded content, brand building, and social media?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to when I was a kid. I always wanted to be a marketer, studied advertising in college, always wanted to be a copywriter, in fact. So having to connect with like audiences was always part of my deal. And I was fortunate enough to land at some companies with like pretty iconic brands. I mean, Huggies, Kleenex, Coca-Cola, where like storytelling and connecting with audiences in an emotional way was just part of the DNA. So that bug came early on, and I was fortunate to land, in places where that was just a compelling, story to have with you at all times.
It's so funny, and I love that you brought up some of the other brands because those are some brands that have done some stuff on social that's really awesome, right? And many times getting a legacy brand on board with social is hard. And I don't know if that was necessarily the case. So tell me a little bit about it. Like at Coke or some of these other places, was it hard, or did they naturally say, no, this is the future. We've got to be here and figure this out? What was that for you like?
Yeah, well, an interesting story at Coca-Cola as you think about legacy brands. I was fortunate enough to be around long enough where Facebook was just coming into the public, and the brand, actually the profile, the page for Facebook wasn't even started by us. It was started by two fans. And so when you think about the love of the brand and the DNA that sort of exists about bringing people together on social platforms, it sort of was natural for a big legacy brand to be part of that story and be part of that sort of new cultural norm. And so it was quite easy, in fact, to get brands on the platforms. And so
Mm.
there's a natural sort of dynamic that was created there with relationships.
I love that, and I'm literally I've got Fans First, the book, the Savannah Bananas, Jesse Cole's book,
Yeah.
kind of over there. So when you say Fans First, they talk about that a lot. But I love that's where you started. So maybe a little bit. This is what my questions, but take me back in time. Like you were at Coke for a long time. Take me back in time. What was it like in those early days? And then as you built it out and kind of established it, what was it like? Not only from a kind of stateside, as we know, kind of Coca-Cola, but it's a international brand a little bit. So tell me a little bit of that evolution that happened from the early days of social at Coke to where you kind of built it to.
Yeah, I like to say that there's brands that do social and there's social brands, and I think that's part of the ethos that you want to look at for brands in terms of being very much part of the culture, part of a relationship that you're building, part of a two-way dialogue. So I think the early days were more centered around um, a platform as a distribution channel, right? You're getting work out there, but maybe you're not connecting as well with audiences. Maybe you're not seeking input and helping audiences sort of participate and co-create with you. So I think that evolution, sort of happened over time where you amass a lot of followers and fans, but you also, in that point, you start to become a little bit more of a mass medium vehicle, and you're trying to get people to engage sort of more at a local and personal level. And I think as you think about the strategy for a lot of these brands, especially Coca-Cola, I mean, that strategy is rooted in connecting people across the world, cross cultures, right? Like sharing a Coke with one another. And so naturally, you have this position where your job is actually to cross cultures, geographical boundaries. And so that just became a natural part of the strategy as it moved into like more social at the core of not letting barriers of geographies or channels, kind of bind you. And so I think that's part of what is helpful in having like a strong brand position where that's just naturally rooted in what social marketing is all about.
You used the phrase social at the core. It reminds me of a struggle that I feel like a lot of social media managers and social media departments have, where a brand goes off, develops a brand campaign, and they come back and they're like, hey, social team, put this on YouTube, or a social team, put this on Facebook. And I want to break open some things like Share the Magic and Share a Coke with you here in a minute because they're awesome. But before we get kind of the details of some of the bigger kind of activations, how was it? What happened? Was it leadership? Was it people? What was it that made social have a seat at the table as something that's got to be considered as we do these very large scale, I'll call them campaigns, but very large scale kind of media and big branding initiatives? What was it about Coca-Cola that made them adopt this kind of social at the core mindset?
Yeah, it was really rooted in understanding the consumer and behaviors, right? I think I always take a perspective as your job is to represent the consumer in all you do. So while you have the big branded campaigns, the big marketing efforts, the big budgets to do a lot of really great things, there's never a shortage of ideas. So often you're tasked with as a social team as, hey, what's in it for the consumer? There's a lot of noise out there. How do you make things that really connect and compel them to take an action? And so ultimately, what we found to be successful is having campaigns. I think you mentioned like Share a Coke, campaigns that were rooted in connection and personalization. And if you think about that one, having your name on a can was pretty awesome. And so you think about just having that and people then sharing that with one another, or people then saying, well, that's naturally a social idea, because then you want to see your name on the can, and you want to talk to Coca-Cola and you say, hey, when can I have my name on it? And then you switch that up and you start to say, okay, we're going to add more names to can. So all of those things become naturally social at the core based on an idea that sort of is share worthy. And then also just looking at, what ideas like feel like not only will people just view it and watch it, but what ideas will they share? Because that's the ultimate goal. If they love it so much, they'll share it.
Yeah, I was able to, when I was at Universal, we had some partnerships with obviously Coca-Cola down at Universal Parks, and so we were a Coke theme park, and I got to go up to Coke, and I got my name and my kids' names, my dog's names on a Coca-Cola glass bottle. They mailed it to me, one of our partners there, and it mattered. It mattered, right? It was personal. It was relevant. And the thing that I loved about it is Coke found a way to be relevant in a way that wasn't kind of pushing their message necessarily, because at the end of the day, there's only a few ways you can talk about Coke and soda. Not every company is as social forward as Coke is and or was. You guys did some amazing things, but a lot of places are still thinking social is that thing to do on the side. It's something to kind of give your fans. It's a little community effort that we're going to do. It's part of the mix. We got to do it, but it's not part of the core of who we are and how we express our brand out to the public. And so I've been in seats with CMOs where I'm trying to convince people to invest and help us build this team and help us be this and that. And I know I talked to a lot of social media directors that feel this, and I'm sure you've felt it over the years, giving advice to people. what is the challenge there? What do you think is going on? Again, speculate with me a little bit of like what's going on in these legacy businesses that are having a hard time in 2024
Yeah.
realizing the importance of relevance, storytelling, and engagement in these very, very pervasive platforms.
Yeah, I've seen it all the time, and I witnessed it as well, and experienced it. I think what part of the challenge is sometimes we get driven in this performance marketing culture where everything has to drive to a sale, everything has to drive to a transaction. I think what we tend to lose in some of that is the beauty and art of storytelling and how you can change the perception of your brand, how you can make people fall in love with your brand, which ultimately does lead into engagement and does lead into having your product or service be part of their lives. I
Mm-hmm.
think we sometimes just get caught into saying, hey, it's got to be this thing, and that's how I'm looking at social, versus social is just a combination of a lot of things, top and bottom funnel. And I think you start to think about um, the way that data gets represented in some of those conversations. I've often told teams where let's keep in mind that every data point that we see, there's a human behind it. So every follow, every share, every subscribe, there's a person behind that, and we have the unique ability to be able to connect with those individuals, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. So I
Yeah.
think in some companies or organizations, they've probably looked at social as maybe a free tool, a free medium that you put a
The free
profile.
store. I used
Yeah,
to tell my team, we're not the free store.
exactly, right? And kind of set it and forget it, but that's not really the case. I mean, especially
No.
nowadays, there's so much noise and competition that you really have to cultivate a community, and you really have to dive in. So I think people are just looking at it very one-dimensionally sometimes, and that's not really going to grow your brand.
Was there something at Coke that just, I don't know, inherently valued brand building over performance? And again, I know at the end of the day, there's a lot of, every business is different, right? Coke's major purchase point is not a Coca-Cola owned store, right? It's a Walmart, it's a Winn-Dixie, it's a lot of different, maybe it's an Amazon even today. And so kind of changing hearts and minds is the whole game. But is that something that you saw evolve over time as you were there, or was it just always a part of the ethos?
Yeah, I think it's always been part of the ethos, well before me and generations before me. I mean, those brands have always been part of culture and always been part of creating something bigger and sort of transcending the category and having strong points of view across cultures. So that wasn't really something that I think any individual can take credit for. It's just part of
Yeah.
being ubiquitous brands. But I do think that there's ultimately challenges along the way where as new leaders come in and as business ebbs and flows, you start to question the things that traditionally have gone well. And there's
Yeah.
always a way to like reposition brands. And I feel like a lot of times we've used social marketing as one of the ways to reposition a brand to like new audiences, especially attracting younger audiences over the years. And so I think that's become an incredible tool to be able to sort of put your personality out there
Mm-hmm.
and create some really dynamic content and experiences that resonate with consumers that are
Yeah.
really, again, part of the DNA, but just do it in new ways.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, so one of the defining moments in my career, right? When we're building our own personal careers, we're curating knowledge, information, we're thinking of things on our own. One of the things that shaped me a lot was the Coca-Cola Content 2020 initiative. And you were there for a while, so I'm sure you were a part of seeing that come live. And for those of you that don't know it, it's a video that came out, I don't know, kind of mid, 2000 teens. And it talked about kind of what, Coca-Cola is going to have to become by 2020 now or 2024, which is hilarious. But it was a progressive take on the importance of brand building, on the importance of storytelling, on the importance of UGC. And they even hinted a little bit of it, the explosion of creators, right? Like it wasn't a direct call out, but for sure talked about the liquidity of storytelling, right? Like I think that's the main kind of takeaway for me. And it really shaped my opinions. I still believe in it. I still share it. We share it around our office here at Maverick. So I don't know. Take me behind the scenes of that. Like, did you see that get formed? What was it like when you first saw that? How did it influence your team? And where did it go? Did it go away with the leadership? Because I know there were some changes of leadership, or did it still kind of stay, but it just wasn't as of much of a thing? I know I just asked you like 4 questions in one.
Yeah, no, it's great and great memory too. Well, just a credit to the visionary leaders that we had at Coca-Cola, who really believed in the art of storytelling and connection, and we often talked about within that is the goal was to have a disproportionate share of cultural conversations, and so the way to do that was not going to be with the traditional advertising model where it's all about passive viewership and sort of passive marketing. Is this needed to be participatory, this needed to be literally engaging, and so I think it was really ahead of its time in terms of how it positioned it. Even the way it was presented was engaging and super unique, and
It had to be, right? You can't
yeah.
talk about content without having an amazing piece of content to share it
Yeah,
with the world.
yeah, and brilliant, brilliant leaders sort of like pushing that through into the marketing system. And you started to see the impact of that in terms of just how we operated, ultimately in creating really iconic campaigns and really exciting work. And you mentioned creators in UGC. I mean, that became a much bigger part of how we went to market. And even in present day, before we even entered TikTok, there were millions of videos of Coca-Cola. So that's a treasure trove of information that gave us perspective on how people were engaging with our brand, what they were saying. It's like, we often talk about these platforms as the world's biggest focus groups. And when we
Yeah.
think about it, there's so much content that's happening with our brand that it's almost a blessing to really have that and kind of consider that part of your content arsenal.
I feel like I'm getting a graduate degree in what I already believe in, which is social and big brand storytelling. I love the phrase, the art of storytelling and connection. We talk a lot about connection here. And then I think this phrase that you use is actually from the 2020, the disproportionate share of cultural conversation. And that doesn't happen, though, without significant investment and significant intentionality, right? Like you can say that all you want. And I think a lot of brands say, we want storytelling, we want engagement, and then they don't do it. Or when you're like looking at the budget line item, you're like, wait, where's the line item that says we're going to be telling more stories or we're going to invest in influencers or
Yeah.
creators? It's like, oh, it's a little one over here, right? So that's kind of the world. But I love that Coke really kind of put their money where their mouth was. Let's shift a little bit and let's talk about functional social. Really enterprise social. You built it, right? I didn't build the thing that you built, but I built something on my own at Universal that started as 3 people and in the end was almost 20. And the budget shifted significantly, and we showcased the ability to build brands with personality, with content, with storytelling, with engagement and community management. And I've got my own story, but they're all so different. And I love to hear people's stories about how they actually kind of built a what I like to call an enterprise level social media team, because there's managers and directors of social right now that were us, Roberto, 15 years ago, and they're figuring it out. They're going through the same problems, right? They're trying to convince leadership what they're doing is important. They're trying to get more budget for influencers and for creators, and they just don't have kind of the influence. So maybe tell me a little bit about what was the team when you first got in? What did it look like when you left? And what were some of those big takeaways that you learned building an enterprise level social media team?
I would say that for the most part, um, the great news is we had leader buy-in. We had a very strong commitment that digital social marketing needed to be a bigger part of what we were doing. And so that became, sort of the basis for the model going forward. What it then became is just more of make sure we have the right people to be able to do the work we want to do, the right talent. So if we're engaging um, youthful audiences, let's make sure that we have people that know how to communicate to youthful audiences. Or in particular, if we're talking about sports, let's have D1 athletes part of the team, and people that can really speak to the products and the types of things that we're doing. So we wanted to be really authentic in how we built out teams. And then the other thing is also, um, things don't always go the way you plan when you're starting out, an enterprise
Boy, is
model.
that true?
So, you set it up one way and maybe things aren't working
Oh
or
my
we're too
God.
slow. So, it was really interesting in terms of starting a team where in getting into this sort of idea of like real-time marketing and being agile is we had all the capabilities in the world around analytics and the tools and the people who were diving into insights and newsroom operations. But what we didn't figure out at first was we didn't have the rest of the teams, the creators, the people that like had to go and put that insight into a concept
A
and
thing.
into a
Yeah.
thing. And so while you have this like rush to get all of these magical insights and we're sharing that data, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, like we're not as agile as you are in accessing and delivering the insights. So we had to really work at what was what became choices we had to make in terms of getting people oriented to that mindset of, yeah, we are going to operate in culture, but we're going to set up teams for a good opportunity and make sure that they have the right skills and the right mindset and the freedom to be able to operate in real time. So I think it's just aligning sometimes those teams to all have that same mindset so it
Yeah.
works all across the board.
You talk about speed, and I think about it a lot, especially in a world today with AI and a lot of different platforms that are giving us speed and capabilities. Like we didn't really have CapCut and stuff like that back when we were, kind of building and running these teams, and so it's a whole new world. But maybe double click into that a little bit and tell me, what do you mean when you even say teams? Like what were you trying? Because speed and agility and alignment is really really important. But if we're all just doing a lot of content planning and a lot of talking and a lot of coordinating, it's like, who's writing the funny stuff? Who's making the great content? How are we getting this stuff published and out to the right audiences? So I don't know if there's a way you can go a little bit deeper into maybe even some of those teams that you were kind of trying to think about of how do you operate a specific one in a culturally relevant way?
Yeah. So a lot of the brands that I've worked on sort of had this mentality where we started with a very strong strategy, and I would say too, and I'm going to digress for a second here, but there's also this other side of the belief where you have to react to everything, and I think that's part of the
Yep.
challenge with marketers is that not everything requires you to react, and if it's not part of your strategy, not part of your DNA, your tone of voice, and it feels forced, then there absolutely shouldn't be a role for your brand in that particular
Yeah,
case.
don't just chase trends to be trends, because then
Exactly.
you're like popcorn. You're like, there's no real value or meat here. You were just relevant for like 30 seconds. Yeah, we talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. So as we think about brands operating in culture, you've just expressed it. Is now you have these I would say Canva templates and everything that can sort of make everything quicker and AI. And so the early stages of that were literally like doing those things. Hey, if we're going to react, let's have guardrails in terms of how we're building that out. So our creators know what areas we're going to be working with. Our strategists know, the operating model in terms of how that gets sort of like disseminated into the work structure. So to me, it was ultimately a very like well-oiled machine from the time that you were looking at building your overarching strategy to what real-time and cultural sort of conversations looked like to all the way down the line in terms of how the creators were creating that, but making sure that at the end of the day, like those insights were exciting. We always
Mm-hmm.
wanted to operate off of an exciting insight, and we go all the way back to like meme cultures and
Yeah.
things that sort of were challenges at the time that were pre TikTok and being part of culture. But that took a lot of practice in order to be able to do that.
Yeah. Just a quick one here. Any best practices you've noticed over the years to get a team to be more in the know, more socially in the know, more on culture, and just kind of fostering creativity in the team? Anything that y'all did? Any meetings you had, or any processes that you tried to leverage that you found successful?
Really, it was built on a structure where no idea is a bad idea and an idea could come from anywhere. So those are the types of things that I felt like just breaking down, organizational silos to get people in a room were super helpful in
Yeah.
getting ideas brainstormed and concepted, because you who knows who's going to see something in
Yeah.
an insight. And I'm probably like every other social marketer. I have thousands of like screenshots in my iPhone right now that are some form of inspiration or an idea or a note that I have. And I think those are the parts of the things that have to feel organic in how you set up your teams. Like you have to allow for that type of I would say dialogue and conversation to sort of happen naturally.
You brought up creators a little bit, and I feel like that's like got to be a second episode. We don't have time to get into that today. I did want to talk about a couple other things. Let's spend a couple minutes on Share a Coke. I know we kind of touched on it a little bit, but for me, it was really a foundational campaign. I've heard rumors this like started as like a small campaign in Australia. Is that true or
It
not
is,
true?
yeah,
That's
it
true.
did start.
Okay. And then it kind of got spread out, and so you can kind of tell us a little bit of the story, maybe. But the thing that I loved about it was, and it's been in so many social media managers' decks about, look what we can do, right? But the thing that's interesting and compelling about this is, you have a brand people really care about. And by the way, big fan of Coke, big fan of Diet Coke. I know there's a lot more products in the Coca-Cola kingdom, but big fan. And what was it about Share a Coke that just took off? And then how did it help the social team? I don't know, maybe tell more micro stories, kind of lean into all of the opportunities that it created.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, ultimately that idea was social at the core to begin with. And so when you think about like hyper personalization, the ability to share, which was in the title of the campaign itself, and it was universal, right? So while it started in one country, obviously there was no barriers to language or sharing or that idea. It was so part of a personal perspective that oftentimes we're looking at things that, oh, I can't do it here, I can't do it in this marketplace, but that inherently is something that knows no boundaries because it's part of a universal human insight. And so that just gave social teams the ability to sort of work very well within that perspective of we're gonna just continue to highlight stories around that.
Mm-hmm.
So if people are getting married and they have the products at their weddings with the names on it, if people found long lost loves, like just that whole idea just became like a whole UGC and
It was crazy.
creator forum for us, because it was about this idea that something is made for you, and then you can share it with someone else, which
Yeah.
again part of the DNA.
There's no bigger power in brand building than advocacy. And to create a platform that people not just will do things based on incentive, but will do things because they just want to be a part of the story is so cool. We did a big hashtag Universal Moments campaign at Universal, kind of sharing kind of your story, right, about kind of what you do here at our theme parks. Hundreds of thousands of people engaged, but it was nothing like the millions of people that did Share a Coke and how it became kind of culturally relevant. So, all right, last story here. You kind of teased on it earlier, but Coca-Cola is figuring out the world of TikTok. Gen Z is exploding. We know there's an opportunity. You're not as prevalent from a brand standpoint, but there's a lot of stuff that's happening out there. Take me through the process, both strategic and activation, to review, to audit, to build a strategy, to tell me kind of what that went through. And then ultimately, you ended up, kind of winning a award for this, like, share the magic. But that was just one part of many things that you guys did. So tell me a little about the story about how Coke tried to appeal to Gen Z and really dove into TikTok.
Part of our story started with wanting to create experiences for Gen Z, ultimately to help provide some more relevancy and resonance with that community. And so TikTok obviously was one of those areas where we were looking into quite a bit in terms of a really big opportunity. And we think about the cultural impact that TikTok made. And so it was a place you had to be, right? There was no